Hi, Andy. That was really good. Thanks for that. So we're going to look at a question stem.
Yep, I think I recognise this from the first session.
Yeah, so this is one of the higher SDD questions that we used last session. So we'll give you a wee second just to have a wee read through the stem itself. So it's all about an online auction website, tracking the bids, highest bid wins, users register with an email address before they can make their bid. When the auction finishes, if 2 or more users submit the same highest bid, each user's emailed with a chance to increase their bid, and a program's needed to determine the winner of each auction.
Okay, right, so some of the questions we used the last session are here, but let's imagine we want to extend the question so that it covers a full range of skills at higher level.
So we've covered a couple of the skills in the question shown, but there's way more that we could squeeze out of this stem. So have you got any suggestions, Andy?
Well, the first question covers analysis and the second one covers some of the implementation content. So I guess we could go with more implementation because obviously that's, according to the rubrics, that's the biggest area where we can allocate marks.
That's true, but we need to remember that the rubric will try and get a balance of the marks. So we can't have a full question that's just all analysis or just 10 whole marks of implementation.
Okay, right. So next logical one would be design then, because we've not really spoken about that yet.
Yep, there's loads of design that you could add to that, and it's often quite easy to turn an idea for an implementation question into a design question in order to get that kind of balance of skills.
Excellent, right. So, but obviously we're missing testing and evaluation content as well.
Yeah, so those bits are definitely missing. So let's focus in on the testing side of things. What we're going to do is try and think of different ways of asking testing questions. So if you were trying to do that, Andy, where would you start?
Probably where I usually go for these things, just go start to look at the past papers, 2024, 2023 and so on, start to look at them.
Which is absolutely fair enough, but the purpose of these kind of upskilling sessions are to try and get people better at writing their own questions. So where else could you go?
I suppose the course specs, the next logical place. So what content's covered with testing and STD at higher?
So if we take a look at the kind of testing section of the kind of course spec at higher, we've got the kind of comprehensive test plan. So we can talk about something to do with that. We've got different types of errors, syntax, logic, and execution. We've got our debugging techniques, so dry run, trace table, breakpoint, watchpoints.
Okay, so that's a good summary of all the different things we can ask about and what the question would cover. But what should we do next?
So the thing to do is to try and use that content to come up with as many different ideas as you can for different types of testing questions.
Okay, right. So what about some straightforward type questions, like asking about a comprehensive test plan or why it's used? Or we could ask about different types of errors, like syntax, logic, or execution. Or we could ask for a description about some of the debug or one of the debugging techniques. Or quite a common one I remember from past papers is providing students with some code, but there's an error in it and they have to try and fix it. And we've also got trace tables that feature quite commonly at higher level as well. So it would be good to ask students to complete a trace table. Maybe they can then spot an error in the code if they do that and fix the error depending on how many marks we're trying to make the question for.
So that's great. We've got loads of different kind of ideas. Now we just need to try and start turning some of those ideas into actual questions.
Okay, right. So that sounds good. So we can build up a bank of different question styles that all apply to testing, and then we can just chop and change them depending on whether we're going to use it as a class test or a work in class or a homework or a end-of-unit assessment or something like that. But how do you know what a good question would look like and which one would be the best one to use?
So this kind of goes back to the things that you were discussing with Kim earlier, the command words that you use, so the kind of higher order thinking skills from Bloom's, the number of marks that you want to allocate to a question, what details you're going to need to include in your marking instructions. So let's try and take a couple of your ideas and let's try turning them into actual questions. So we've got the STEM at the top.
Okay, right. So what about this one here? What is a syntax error? Okay,
So your kind of first faux pas there is you're not allowed question marks. So we need to start thinking about your command word. So what command word would you be using?
Okay, I forgot about that. So no question marks, so it's just a statement. So what about describe a syntax error?
That's better now that we've got a command word in there, but syntax errors are also at N5. So where would the higher content for that question be?
Aye, that's a good point. It does seem a bit more straightforward. So it's not quite that clear either what we're really asking them. Are we asking them to describe what it is or give an example? So maybe pupils would be a bit unsure about how they're meant to answer that question.
So even if you put in some code there, you would struggle to write a higher question that has a syntax error. So I think we're probably best off to move on and let's pick one of your other ideas and see if we can get something out of that.
Okay, right. So what about this question? Explain the difference between a watch point and a break point.
Okay, so that's a good start because we've got our command word there, explain, and that's a higher order skill. And it's more straightforward than just it's a higher order skill than something that would be straightforward like a state or a describe. How many marks would you allocate that?
I think if you're asking about two things in a comparison, then it'd be logical. It'd be 2 marks, one for a description of a breakpoint and one to describe a watch point.
Okay, I'd agree on the 2 marks, but go back to your question. Do you actually ask for a description?
The question asks for an explanation, so does that mean we'd need to change the wording of the question?
No, the wording of the question's fine. You just need to maybe rethink your marking instructions. So how else could you allocate those 2 marks?
So what about 1 mark for talking about a breakpoint stopping a specific line of code, and a 2nd mark for talking about a watch point stopping when a certain condition is met?
That sounds good. The only slight downside to that question is that it doesn't have any problem solving in it.
So what's your thoughts on that question? Is it not quite good enough that we could use?
Not at all. I mean, it's still a perfectly valid question because 50% of the marks in the paper should be C-level questions. But think back to your ideas from earlier. Would any of those ideas give you a bit more problem solving and maybe let you squeeze out a few more marks from testing?
Yeah, so when I think about other ones that we've used, it tends to be ones where there's a bit of code, an algorithm, and that's the best way to ask a question about testing the code.
Absolutely. So like almost all the SQA question papers at N5 and higher have some sort of broken code in them where there's an error and you need to find it or fix it or describe it or explain the error.
Yeah, but the STEM didn't have any code with it when we first had a look at it.
But there's nothing to stop you from just putting in a small section of code and then asking a question based on that.
True, but there's not much to go on with this STEM, so where can we go with this scenario?
So again, that goes back to Kim's point from earlier of breaking the STEM so that you can actually add in some extra detail. You could add something like the completed program has a feature that does X, or a new feature is added to the program that does Y.
Yeah, okay, so if we look at this STEM, I could maybe add something about add an email address or something like that, maybe.
So doing that, something with the email address would give you an opportunity to introduce some string handling, but then that might be better as a design question or an implementation question.
Okay, right. So if we think a bit more about the auction situation, auction scenario, how about adding someone counting the number of winning bids? Now, if I had some code that had an error and then ask candidates to complete a trace table, this would help them locate the error, and then I could ask them to describe the error, explain why the correct output is not produced, or they could also go on and rewrite a line of code to fix the error. I think we're probably all seeing questions like that.
So that'd be great because then there's definitely going to be some A marks in there.
Okay, and what about some code like this with a breakpoint in line 97?
Okay, so you've got a breakpoint, but technically that means you won't have a trace table because it'll just be a table showing the values of the variables instead.
Yeah, I suppose the trace table would need to go line by line from 87 and track all the variables right through each iteration of the loop.
which would then mean that your trace table would end up being massive. So let's stick with your breakpoint idea to think about how you're going to build the kind of table of values that we're looking for.
Yeah, I suppose the best way was probably to actually do a completed table and then remove bits that the people would then fill in the assessment.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's the best way to do it. So once you've got a completed table that looks something like this, you can then look at the kind of different options about what it is you remove.
Yeah, I know, but how do you know which are the best ones to remove?
It's a tricky one because it really depends on the level of complexity and the number of marks that you want to have available. You don't want to make something in the trace table so trivial that like you've just removed the loop counter. But then again, you need to think about that 50% of the marks on the paper should be C marks.
Okay, so what about this?
That looks good. How many marks would you give it and what would those marks be for?
Right, so we've got 3 columns here. A mark for each row would be 4, or 1 mark for each column, but then 3 marks seems like quite a lot, because the values in column 1 are pretty straightforward for a higher candidate, and the highest bid only changes once as well, so maybe 3 might be a bit high.
I'd agree. So how about something like 2 marks, 1 for column 1 and 2 together, and then the second mark for column 3?
That looks good, Colin. The second mark has been allocated for only changing the number of winning bids to 1, and then 1 is duplicated on the subsequent row when it should change to 2.
Yeah, and that's the bit that's kind of trickier, and that's the bit that's likely to kind of generate that A-type mark.
Yeah, so that's obviously the table complete now. Can we add anything else?
Well, the purpose of the breakpoint is to try and help debug the code. So your initial idea was to kind of follow up with asking about the error or how to fix it or something like that that will allow you to get another mark or 2 out of this part of the question.
Yeah, so as I was talking about earlier, in the past papers, I've seen questions along the lines of describe the error or explain why the correct output hasn't been produced or rewrite the line of code to fix the error. So what type of question should we go for?
Again, it's great that you've got different options, and again, it will depend on the number of marks and the level of challenge that you want to include in the question. Remember, we talked about Bloom's taxonomy in the last session, and the command words that we'll use, that also has an impact on that level of difficulty.
So something like state the line number of the line that contains the error might be a C question.
Yeah, but something like explain why this code doesn't produce the expected result would be more likely to include an A mark because generally candidates find explain questions more challenging to do.
So how about asking for an explanation of why the correct output is not produced? This would only have 1 mark, and the expected answer would be something like none of the bids can be higher than the highest, or something like that.
Great. So now that's taken shape into a really good question that focuses on testing.
Thanks, Colin. That was great. Thank you.
So hopefully you can see that there's more than just one way to ask a question that covers a particular skill. In this case, we focused on testing, but the same process applies to the different areas of the course.
Yeah, it's been great coming up with different ideas for questions, taking the ideas and turning them into questions, and then thinking about what would work and what wouldn't, what would be too challenging or what would be too straightforward.
So now it's really time for everyone to have the chance to develop their own question writing skills. So I'll pass you over to Morag, who'll describe the remainder of the activities and how we're going to carry them out for the rest of the session.